Have you been following what's happening in Cyprus? Cyprus is a pretty small country. It's an eastern Mediterranean island with just over 1 million people in the whole place. Canada has a historic connection to Cyprus. Remember, we actually had peacekeepers there for nearly 30 years as a buffer between the Greek side of the island and the Turkish side of the island. And over the course of the mission, 25,000 Canadians served in Cyprus and 28 of us died. But recently, Cyprus has got its act together a bit. Its economy picked up. It became a shipping hub and a banking center. There was even some progress on peace. That wall that divided the island was torn down a few years ago. It's not rich, but it's definitely not third world poor. It's a typical Southern European kind of place. Not as wealthy as Germany, say, but about where Greece or Spain is in terms of per capita GDP. So it seemed like a perfect fit to join the European Union in 2004 and then to give up their own currency, the Cypriot pound, in favor of the euro as their currency in 2008. For a while, things were going pretty well. A liberal banking system, a low corporate tax rate, and its geographical location as a bridge between East and West. Well, Cyprus became a banking haven on paper. It was actually the largest source of foreign investment into Russia, for example. Now, of course, that's not true. It's just that Cyprus was a middleman, like some of those banks in the Caribbean sometimes are. It became a place where Russian millionaires and billionaires liked to stash their dough. I mean, safer than keeping it in Russia, right? Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of other European countries, things have been getting wobbly, especially in the financial sector. Banks in Cyprus were in trouble. They had loaned money to other wobbly places like Greece. They were at risk of failing. They needed a bank bailout, the latest of so many European Union countries to go cap in hand to the strong euro economies like Germany. Now remember though, Cyprus is small, 1 million people. So the banks needed just 10 billion euros, or about $13 billion. It's actually a rounding error in a time when bank bailouts are usually measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. But Germany balked. And you can understand why. It was being asked to bail out freewheeling banks in a low-tax, low-regulation environment that were really just the plaything of Russia's new aristocracy. Now, here's a statistic for you. Russian deposits in Cyprus banks totaled $31 billion. Now, the entire Cyprus economy's GDP is only $25 billion. Can you imagine that? So Germany wasn't really being asked to bail out 1 million Cypriots by propping up their banks. It was being asked to bail out Russian gazillionaires. So they refused. The masters of the universe in the Eurozone made a new condition, a shocking condition. They demanded that Cyprus's banks literally seize 10% of all the money in their safes in return for the bailout. It was an ambush. It wasn't voted on or even debated in Cyprus's parliament. It was just an order issued by the European Union, and poof, it happened. Anyone and everyone who had money in a Cyprus bank account just had 10% of their savings, 10% of their children's college fund, 10% of their retirement nest egg, 10% of their life savings just taken. Poof. They called it a bank tax. Yeah, well, you can imagine the shock. Imagine if that happened to you. So there was a run on the banks, of course. People wanted to get their money out. I mean, even if they only had 90% of their money left, well, maybe the banksters would steal another 10% next week. So Cyprus literally shut down the country's banks for a week and limited ATM withdrawals to 100 euros while they tried to figure things out. Now, after the public backlash, the terms of the seizure were revised a little bit. The first 100,000 euros in savings would be exempt from this tax. So that's about $130,000. But anyone with a larger bank account could lose 40% of their savings. Sorry, that's just called stealing. I mean, no vote, no debate, no contract, no rule of law. Just an order from a foreign banker and a yes master from the banks. Done deal. Well, you can imagine the rage from Russian millionaires, and you can imagine the terror struck into the hearts of every single person, rich or poor, across Europe who is subject to such a whimsical and capricious and unpredictable and lawless authority as that. Now, the Dutch chairman of the Eurozone said that raiding bank accounts of savers to pay for the bank bailouts could be the new pattern across Europe, in places even like Italy and Spain too. Here's Jaron Dijsselbloem. Here's what he said, quote, "If there's a risk in a bank, our first question should be, okay, what are you and the bank going to do about it? What can you do to recapitalize yourself? If the bank can't do it, then we'll talk to the shareholders and the bondholders. We'll ask them to contribute in recapitalizing the bank. And if necessary, the uninsured deposit holders." Now, hang on. I understand asking a bank to fix itself rather than relying on a bailout from taxpayers. I agree with that. So I agree with asking a bank to fix itself. Asking the shareholders in the bank to bail out the bank makes sense. They're the owners of the bank. They invest in the bank. They accept the risk of the bank. I get that completely. But just plain old taking the money of people who deposit their cash in the bank's safe? Just stealing that to help keep the bankers healthy? That would be like saying to a mechanic, if you're in financial trouble, just seize that car that you're working on and sell it if you need to. Now, I understand that depositors above a certain level are not insured. I get that. But that's against a bank's failure. That's not against a bank's theft. The bank itself seizing your money, let alone with the government's approval and encouragement, that is called stealing. And it is the new European plan. Keep the bankers strong by stealing from the people who bank with them. As Dijsselbloem said, that kind of theft isn't just for Cyprus anymore. It could be for anyone. Do you think that if Cyprus knew that its banks could effectively be expropriated by some foreign banker overnight, that it would have joined the Eurozone 5 years ago in the first place? But here's an extra level of irony and maybe even of poetic justice. These Euro bankers are pretty clever, aren't they? No need to pass laws or regulations. Just strike a deal to seize billions from customers and banks. If a bank did that on their own, they'd go to jail for embezzlement. But this was done at the government's order. Pretty smart move. But who do you think is smarter, a scheming Dutch banker or a paranoid Russian oligarch? Yeah, my money's on the Russians. See, the thing about Cyprus's banks is that they're closed now, actually until tomorrow. If you're some poor schlub in Nicosia, get used to it. But there are branches of Cypriot banks in other countries, like in London, England, for example, and they weren't shut down. Let me quote to you from an amazing and shocking news story reported by Reuters. Get this. No one exactly knows how much money has left Cyprus's banks or where it has gone. The two banks at the center of the crisis, Cyprus Popular Bank and Bank of Cyprus, have units in London which remained open throughout the week and placed no limits on withdrawals. Bank of Cyprus also owns 80% of Russia's Uniastrum Bank, which put no restrictions on withdrawals in Russia. So while ordinary Cypriots queued at ATM machines to withdraw a few hundred euros as credit card transactions stopped, other depositors used an array of techniques to access their money. Can you imagine? The big fish were taking out millions, while ordinary Joes couldn't even use their bank cards. But I've got to read you something even more disgusting. Remember, this whole deal was being negotiated in secret between Cyprus's president and the European bankers. Get this. This is also from the Reuters report. Quote, at one point on Sunday afternoon, the conservative president threatened to resign in an emotional exchange with the heads of the European institutions and the International Monetary Fund. The lenders called his bluff, saying that if he quit, they would continue negotiations with the Speaker of the Cypriot Parliament, next in line constitutionally, a participant in the talks said. Anastasiadis stayed. That's the president. He stayed. So I got a question. Who runs Cyprus? Now, this used to be a debate between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, right? Now it's not anymore. The Cypriot people have no say at all. Their parliament really has no say. There was a secret negotiation between their president and foreign bankers. And when their president wasn't compliant enough, when he didn't want to gouge his own people, the foreign bankers told him, well, if he didn't, they'd simply deal with another politician who would. This isn't just economically disastrous. It is a democratic disaster. Cypriot democracy has been replaced by the most brazen rule of banksters. That's short for bank gangsters that I've ever heard of in my life. They did this to Cyprus. They announced it's their model for other European bailouts. Do you think they'll really stop at Spain or Italy? Oh, okay, all right. Just one more quote from the most amazing Reuters news report I think I've ever read in my life. They were quoting a Eurozone central banker warning the country of Latvia against taking money from any people fleeing Cyprus with their cash. Let me quote the story. Ready? It was made clear to our Latvian friends that if they want to join the euro, they should not provide a haven for Russian money exiting Cyprus, a Eurozone central banker said. What planet are these people from? Latvia should consider itself extraordinarily lucky not to be in the doomed, sinking, exploding, imploding, burning Titanic Hindenburg Death Star called the Eurozone. Hey, Latvia, if you take all that money, we won't let you be our servant, and we won't let us boss you around and steal your money next year. Cuckoo. But listen, one last point. A keen observation made by Greg Gutfeld. He asked, could this happen in America? I mean, plenty of big U.S. banks failed too, right? Lots of bank bailouts in the States, using taxpayers' money, and more just plain old printing money. But they never just stole 10 or 20 or 30 or 40% of money from American citizens' savings, right? Why? Why did it never even occur to class warfare politicians like Barack Obama, who rage against the one percenters? Why did he never even float a trial balloon about just seizing money from even billionaires' bank accounts? And why did the Eurozone bankers not only think about it, but do it? And why did the Cypriot president go along with it in the end, selling out his own people? Now, Gutfeld related this to another American debate these days, gun control. You got 300 million guns in America. That's one for every person. Seriously. And you've got a gun culture built on freedom and constitutional rights and the old motto, don't tread on me. Gun owners use gun for sport or hunting or home defense or just for the pleasure of ownership. But you'll sometimes hear gun owners say that it's the last defense against the state. I know, it sounds crazy, even though that's exactly what the founding fathers of the United States thought and said too. Do you think if some Cyprus-sized American city with 1 million people in it had its banksters and politicians get together, collude to steal 40% of their savings, do you think that city would take it lying down like a bunch of Europeans? I mean, take greater Oklahoma City, population pretty much identical to Cyprus. Do you think those God-fearing, red-blooded, property rights-loving, Constitution-reading, gun-owning patriots would just say, sure, go ahead. I mean, you're the boss. We're just the sheeple. Yeah, sheeple. Seriously, the worst that the people of Cyprus did is stand around for foreign photographers with the word no written on their hand in ink. Boy, that's going to strike terror into the hearts of thieves and banksters and taxmen. Would Americans ever go quietly like that? Well, I bet some would, but I bet most would march on the legislature and the bank, guns in hand. That's really what gun control is about, isn't it? About moving the locus of power away from ordinary people and into the hands of the government. I'm done, but I've got just one last question. Our banks in Canada are among the strongest in the world, and we've tightened up our banking regulations with things like mortgage terms. But God forbid, let's say our biggest banks were failing, and some crooked politician cut a deal with the bank presidents to bail them out by seizing 10 or 20 or 40% of all the money kept in those banks. Do you think that we Canadians would rise up like I bet our American friends would do? Or do you think we'd pull a Cyprus and roll over, European style, and let unelected banksters rob us blind in a secret midnight deal to keep and enhance their own power? Oh, my friends, I wish I knew the answer to that, but I can't pretend that I do.